Have you ever stopped to help someone not knowing that one simple act would change your life forever? It was a cold night in a quiet English village. The rain fell like needles from the dark sky. Grace Miller pulled her coat tight around her shoulders as she walked home from her flower shop. The street was empty except for the sound of raindrops hitting the cobblestone road. Then she saw him, a man standing under a flickering streetlight drenched from head to toe. His army uniform was soaked. His hands trembled slightly as he tried to shield himself from the storm. Grace slowed her steps. Something about him made her stop. He looked lost yet proud, wounded yet calm. She could see the fatigue in his eyes. The man was Marcus Reed, a black soldier who had just returned from deployment overseas. No one had welcomed him home. No one had offered him shelter. Grace took a deep breath and stepped closer. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. He hesitated before nodding. "Just need a place to stay until the morning," he said quietly. His voice was deep but gentle. She knew the risk of letting a stranger in, but something inside told her to trust him. Without another thought, she opened her door. "Come inside," she said. The warmth of her small home wrapped around him. She offered him a towel and a cup of tea. He thanked her politely, but Grace could sense the pain behind his smile. As the rain hammered the windows, they spoke in soft tones. He told her about his service, about the brothers he lost, about how people looked at him differently when he came back. Grace listened quietly. She didn't interrupt. She just cared. The kind of care he hadn't felt in months. Hours passed before they both fell silent. The firelight flickered across the room. For the first time that night, Marcus looked peaceful, but outside the house something else was happening. Mrs. Collins, the neighbor, watched from her window. Her eyes narrowed at the sight of a black man inside Grace's home. She whispered to herself and picked up her phone. The next morning, the gossip spread faster than the rain had fallen. By noon, the whole village was whispering about the florist and the soldier. Grace felt the weight of their stares as she stepped outside to open her shop. But Marcus had already gone. He had left a note. It said, "Thank you for your kindness. You reminded me what home feels like." Grace smiled faintly. She didn't know that the next day a knock on her door would change everything. The kind of knock that could destroy reputations or reveal the truth about what it means to care. The next morning came quiet but heavy, the kind of quiet that feels wrong. Grace Miller had just finished watering her flowers when the sound echoed through her house. A hard, firm knock. 3 times, she froze. Her heart skipped. She walked slowly to the door, wiping her hands on her apron. When she opened it, Officer Daniel Hunt stood there. His uniform was neat, his face polite, his tone distant. "Good morning, Miss Miller," he said. "We received a few calls about last night." Grace blinked, confused. About what, she asked. "About a man seen entering your home," he said flatly. Grace felt her stomach tighten. "The neighbors," she whispered. He nodded slightly. Mrs. Collins stepped out from behind him, pretending to be surprised. She held her shawl tightly around her shoulders and spoke with false concern. "We were just worried, dear. A strange man in your house in the middle of the night." Anything could have happened. Grace looked at her without a word. "Marcus Reed was not a danger," she said firmly. "He was a soldier, a man caught in the rain. I helped him, that's all." Officer Hunt tilted his head slightly. His eyes softened, but his words didn't. "You say he's a soldier. Did you get his full name or ID?" Grace hesitated. "He left early this morning," she said. "He didn't do anything wrong." The officer sighed, writing something down. "Just a routine check, Miss Miller. You understand." Grace nodded slowly, though her chest burned with anger. After he left, Mrs. Collins smiled faintly as if satisfied. She turned to go but paused. "Be careful who you invite into your home, dear. People talk, you know." Grace shut the door before she could finish. Inside, she leaned against the wall, breathing deeply. How could kindness become suspicion so fast? How could one good act turn into something ugly? She sat by the window looking at the road outside. People passed by, but some avoided her eyes. Others whispered. She could feel the judgment pressing against her walls. That evening she closed her shop early. As she locked the door, a small folded note slipped under it. She bent down and opened it. The handwriting was familiar. It was Marcus. It said, "Thank you for last night. They followed me this morning. I didn't stop. Don't worry about me. Just stay safe." Grace's hands trembled. Followed him? By who? She looked down the street but saw no one. Only the dim streetlights and the drizzle beginning to fall again. That night she couldn't sleep. The sound of the earlier knock replayed in her mind again and again. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. Grace sat up, clutching the note. She didn't know if Marcus was safe. She didn't know if helping him had put both their lives in danger. All she knew was that something wasn't right. Around midnight, another knock came, softer this time. She jumped up and ran to the window. A shadow stood outside, soaked in rain again. It was Marcus. She opened the door quickly. He looked exhausted, his uniform muddy, his eyes full of fear. I had nowhere else to go, he said quietly. Grace let him in without a word. Outside on the corner, Mrs. Collins peeked through her curtains again, her phone already in her hand. Grace didn't see her. She only saw Marcus shivering near the fire, whispering that someone had been following him since morning, someone who didn't like seeing him walk freely in that town. Grace knew then that the real storm was only beginning. Grace Miller barely slept that night. The soft crackle of the fire was the only sound filling her small cottage. Marcus Reed sat quietly near the window, his eyes constantly scanning the dark street outside. His uniform was still damp, his boots muddy, his hands trembling slightly though he tried to hide it. Grace made him tea and sat beside him. You said someone was following you, she whispered. Marcus nodded slowly. 2 men in a black car. They were at the station when I arrived, then again near the square. They kept watching me. I tried to lose them, but they knew. Grace frowned. Knew what? Marcus looked down. That I'm not welcome here, he said simply. The next morning the entire village buzzed with gossip. Mrs. Collins had already told everyone about the mysterious soldier staying in Grace's home. At the market people turned away when Grace walked by. A few whispered words reached her ears: shameless, dangerous disgrace. She ignored them, but her chest ached. When she returned home, she found Officer Hunt waiting outside again. The expression was serious, but still carrying that same tone of false courtesy. Miss Miller, I need to ask a few more questions. Grace crossed her arms. About what this time? About the man in your home, he said. Some villagers say he threatened you. Grace's eyes widened. That's a lie, she said. He's not dangerous. He's a soldier who served this country. Officer Hunt hesitated, but then his voice hardened. Be that as it may, some folks here feel uneasy. He's being watched now. Best you stay out of it. He turned to leave, but Grace's voice stopped him. If helping someone makes people uneasy, maybe they should ask themselves why. That evening, Grace returned inside, finding Marcus standing by the fireplace staring at a photo on the mantel. It was of her late husband who died years ago in an accident. Marcus turned his head slightly. You lost someone too, he said quietly. Grace nodded. Long ago. That's why I couldn't leave you in the rain. He smiled faintly. Most people would have. Grace looked at him. Most people aren't kind anymore. As the rain poured outside louder than before, the sound of tires screeching broke the calm. Marcus stiffened. Headlights flashed through the window. Grace peeked outside. 2 men stepped out from a dark car. She recognized one, a man from the market who always sneered at Marcus earlier. They walked toward the door. Grace's pulse quickened. Marcus whispered, stay inside. He stepped toward the door, but she grabbed his arm. They'll twist it against you, she said. Marcus hesitated. The door shook as fists pounded on it. Come out, boy, we don't need your kind here. Grace's eyes filled with tears of anger. She opened the door herself. What do you want? She shouted. One of the men spat on the ground. That man doesn't belong here. Grace stood firm, blocking the doorway. You don't get to decide that. The confrontation drew attention. Curtains moved, doors opened. Mrs. Collins appeared again, clutching her robe, acting shocked. Officer Hunt arrived moments later, his flashlight cutting through the rain. What's going on here? He demanded. The men stepped back, pretending innocence. Just keeping our neighborhood safe, officer. Marcus clenched his fists, but Grace stepped forward. Safe from what? She said sharply. From a man who fought for your safety. From someone who served while you all slept. Silence fell for a moment. Hunt looked between them, unsure. Finally, he muttered, enough for tonight. Everyone go home. The men left, muttering curses. As the officer turned to leave, Marcus whispered, thank you. Grace shook her head. No, Marcus. Thank you for fighting again, even when you shouldn't have to. The rain kept falling steady and cold. In that quiet moment, Grace realized something had changed. She wasn't just protecting a stranger anymore. She was standing against an entire mindset, one built on fear and prejudice. And though the village turned its back on her, she felt stronger than she ever had before. Outside, Mrs. Collins watched from her window, face pale, eyes uncertain for the first time. Inside, Grace looked at Marcus and said softly, they'll come again. Marcus nodded. Then we'll face them together. The storm outside roared, but in her small house, light from the fire flickered stronger than before. The storm had quieted by dawn, but the air still felt heavy with tension. Grace Miller stood by her window, watching the village street shimmer with puddles. Marcus Reed was asleep on the sofa, his chest rising slowly, exhaustion written across his face. He had fought wars abroad, but last night he fought one right here, in a quiet English village that never truly accepted him. Grace wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and whispered to herself, how can people be so blind? The smell of tea filled the room, a fragile comfort after the chaos. But before she could take a sip, a firm knock rattled the door. Marcus woke immediately, his soldier's instincts sharp. Grace looked at him nervously. It's too early for visitors, she said softly. Marcus nodded, moving to stand beside her. The knock came again, louder this time. She opened the door to find Officer Daniel Hunt standing there, hat in hand, raincoat dripping. Behind him stood two men in military uniforms. Grace's heart sank. Hunt cleared his throat. "Miss Miller, we need to speak to Mr. Reed," he said. Marcus stepped forward calmly. "What's this about?" one of the officers replied. "We received word that you deserted your unit." Marcus's eyes widened in disbelief. "That's a lie," he said firmly. "I was discharged honorably. I've done nothing wrong." Grace's pulse quickened. She could see the doubt in Hunt's eyes. He didn't believe Marcus, but he wanted a reason to remove him. "You can't take him," Grace said. "He's done nothing but try to live quietly." Hunt sighed. "Miss Miller, please stay out of this. It's a matter of procedure." But Grace refused to move. "Procedure or prejudice?" she asked, voice shaking with anger. The officers hesitated, but Marcus placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's all right," he said. "Let them check. I have nothing to hide." They escorted him to the car, and Grace stood in the doorway, tears mixing with the cold morning mist. Mrs. Collins watched from her porch again, but this time her face showed guilt instead of judgment. She finally realized the weight of her words. Her gossip had sparked suspicion that led to this. Grace shouted after them, "You're making a mistake." But the car drove off, leaving her in silence. Hours passed. Grace went to the station, demanding answers, but Hunt only said, "It's under review." That night she sat by the fire again, the house unbearably empty. Then she saw something on the floor, a folded paper Marcus had dropped. It was a letter from his commanding officer confirming his honorable discharge, signed and sealed by the military. Grace's eyes widened. She rushed outside, the rain falling once more, and headed straight to the police station. She burst through the door, soaked and breathless. "You took an innocent man," she shouted. Hunt looked startled as she slammed the letter onto his desk. "You didn't even check before judging him," she said, voice trembling. Hunt's eyes scanned the letter, and his face paled. Within minutes, Marcus was released. He stepped out into the rain, his eyes meeting Grace. "You did it," he said softly. "No," she replied, "we did it, because truth doesn't stay buried forever." As they walked back toward the cottage, villagers began to gather, murmuring in shame. Mrs. Collins approached slowly, her umbrella trembling. "Mr. Reed, Miss Miller," she said awkwardly. I'm sorry." Marcus nodded politely but didn't speak. Grace looked at her neighbor, her tone firm but kind. "It's not me you owe an apology to, it's every person you've ever judged without knowing." Mrs. Collins lowered her head. In the days that followed, things began to change. People stopped whispering when Marcus passed. Some even greeted him. The florist shop became busier. Customers curious to meet the woman who stood up against injustice. Grace and Marcus worked side by side repairing her garden, laughter occasionally breaking the quiet. One afternoon, Marcus placed something on her counter, a small wooden box. "For you," he said. Inside was his military medal, gleaming softly. Grace looked up in surprise. "I can't take this," Marcus smiled. "You earned it more than I did. You fought a war I couldn't win alone." That evening, as the sun set behind the village, the same knock echoed again at Grace's door. This time, it wasn't anger, it was gratitude. Villagers stood outside with flowers, food, and apologies. Marcus watched quietly, humbled. Grace opened the door wider, welcoming them in. For the first time in years, her home felt full, not just of people, but of hope. The next morning, a letter arrived addressed to Marcus. It was an official notice from the military commending his service and thanking Grace Miller by name for her bravery in the face of injustice. Tears filled her eyes as she read it aloud. "You changed lives," Marcus said softly. "No," Grace whispered. "You reminded them what humanity looks like." And as the camera would fade out, the rain finally stopped, sunlight pouring through the window, warming both of their faces, a symbol that even in the darkest storms, kindness can still bring light. One act of courage can silence 1,000 voices of hate. If you believe kindness still matters, comment, "I stand with Grace and Marcus" below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories that remind us humanity still wins.